Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks for joining Mark and me and our great guest for a wonderful afternoon and an amazing show. I want to first thank Keg Quiet Hawk for that amazing introduction. You can find him and his wife at nativestorytellers.com. Highly encourage you to do that. Native storytelling is an ancient form of preserving history, one that we seem to have lost touch with. It's nice to touch back into it and remember the magic that once a culture had. So today, depending on where you are in the world, we have an amazing show, and it's one of my favorite topics. So I'm really excited that Mark has found this lovely lady to be our special guest. Mark, you with me?
Yes, I am.
Yay!
How are you doing today?
Well, aside from croaking along, I'm just fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, we've only mentioned crop circles a couple times at most. I think that's going to change today. We have 2 hours devoted to crop circles. And
well, it's funny because it's one of my favorite topics, and I can't imagine we've been doing shows together for almost 9 months, and we haven't hit on them once.
Yeah, and we have today's show is going to lay the foundations for the one we have June 4th. So this is one of those pivotal shows again, and our Barnsley and Rotherham loyal listeners are going to like this one. We have our special guest is one of their very own. Lucy Pringle is here, but she is calling in from a secret pub after finishing some fish and chips. But she's a leading researcher on crop circles, and she just published her book with Inner Traditions, and it is entitled The Energies of Crop Circles. It's an excellent book. She leads tours to and in helicopters above the crop circles, and you can learn more about Lucy by going to her website, lucypringle.co.uk. Hi, Lucy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. We are looking forward to the next 2 hours, and like Barbara said, we really, it may have just had a couple passing references to crop circles, and this is just going to be our first show devoted to the subject, and we're really looking forward to the insights and extensive research you've done and learning so much about them over the last 25 years. most of us have seen the hoaxers with the board and stomping on a crop overnight, and they get their 15 minutes of fame the next day. But you document in your book that there is something non-human, unexplained about the non-hoaxed ones, and that's what really makes your one of the aspects that makes your book really captivating is the experiments, the eyewitness accounts, the documentation you received from so many people who visited the sites with you and sent you emails. So maybe we should start with something that one case study that really disproves the hoax theory right off the bat, and that's the Julia set. And you're stating in your book that these dimensions, and you have the a photograph to go with it. The measurements are 915 feet long by 508 feet wide, and it appeared within like a 40 to 50 minute time period. People can't stomp through wheat and make a perfect pattern, all these circles in such a short period. What's unique about the Julia set study?
I think there are several unique factors to the Julia set. One of the first one was that it actually happened in daylight. Mm-hmm. Another one was that it didn't come to light for maybe 13 years after it happened. And a third unusual one was that it was actually witnessed. And the story behind it is really fascinating. I've been giving a lecture in Hampshire at the Alton College, and after I finished, apparently one of the people who'd been there took a taxi and just said to the taxi driver, "I've been to a fascinating talk on crop circles." And the taxi driver said, "Well," she said, "I saw one appear at Stonehenge." Now, this was many, many years ago, and to my knowledge, there wasn't a crop circle at Stonehenge that particular year. So I telephoned all around, and no, none had been reported. So I managed to get the taxi driver's telephone number, and I rang her, and I said, "This is really interesting. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?" Because I said, "There just doesn't seem to be one at all." And she said, "Oh, no. She said it was many years ago." So I said, "Well, there have been three. One was in 1996, one was in 1997, and one was in 2002, and these were opposite Stonehenge." And she immediately said, she said it was in 1996. She said, "I know that for a fact, because my son was on leave from the army," and she said she was going down to the West Country to visit him. And she said another thing. She said she knew it was a Sunday, because as she was driving down from a roundabout in a town called Amesbury, as you come down the hill, you can see Stonehenge on the right. And as she came down the hill, a whole mass of traffic was coming up the other way, and there's usually a jam, a log jam on the A303. And she said so far as she was concerned, she had a straight run because all the others were coming back on Sunday to go to work on Monday or wherever they were going. But also, she said, as she came down the hill, she said she noted a very curious thing, that there was an isolated cloud hovering above the field opposite Stonehenge. And as she got closer, she saw a whole lot of cars, and they were pulled into the verge by the fence in this field opposite Stonehenge. And as she was nearing the field, a car pulled out, so she nipped in, quick as a flash, and got out of the car and thought to herself, I wonder what all these people are looking at in this field. And she got to the fence, and she looked, and she said she saw the most miraculous thing. She said the crop was actually going down in front of her eyes. Now, she was Irish, and she said, it's just like a leprechaun. She said, I couldn't believe her eyes. And so I said, have you any idea? Oh, yes, I mentioned first, I said, what about the cloud? I said, was it in any way physically connected with the ground? And she said, no, it wasn't physically connected with the ground, but there seemed to be some sort of communication going on between the two. Because as the crop went down in the field and enlarged, so this circle hovering above was growing and growing and rotating and seemed to be growing in size just as the crop in the field was going down and enlarging. And she said she couldn't see the shape of what was happening in the field because she was on the same plane, the same level. So I said, right now, how long do you think this took? And she said, I have no idea. She said, when you're watching something like that, you're not looking at your watch. And I said, no, of course you're not. But then I said, have you any idea? And she said, well, no, not really. She said, maybe 20 to 25 minutes. She said, I don't know. And I was quite upset about this. I was quite put out because all the previous reports I'd had, which I documented in my first book, and they were the witnesses, the eyewitnesses, all said these happened in a matter of seconds. And here was a story about it happening in 20 to 25 minutes. I was really, really quite disappointed. So I challenged her again. And she got quite annoyed with me. She said, Lucy, listen. She said, I was there, and I know what I saw. You were not there, and you didn't know. You don't know what I saw. So, well, I mean, there was no arguing with that, was there? So I went away, and I was really upset about this. And then I thought on the way home, as I was driving home, hold on a minute. All the ones that appeared in a matter of seconds, they were just single, simple circles. And here we had something which was 915 feet times 508, and it had 151 circles. Now, this is a very different kettle of fish. So I rang through to James Lyons, who is my guru, and I've been doing work with him for years, and who's my co-author. And I told him about this. And I said, listen, Jim, is there any time element because of the size and number of circles? And he said, yes, of course. He said, just give me all the measurements. Well, in those days, we used to have people going out and measuring the circles, but now that the farmers don't want people in because of tourists trampling and damaging their fields, all this has really come to an end, which is very sad. But so I gave him the measurements, and he wrote back, and this is what he said. It's generally accepted that as a result of work conducted in the 1990s, it's possible to calculate the time a formation takes to appear based on the size and number of circles. The method relates to the Earth's gravitational and magnetic fields. This predicts a velocity of the resulting vortex filament of some 10 foot per second. To create the 151 circles in the 915.5 times 580 foot pattern would take us the order of 20 to 25 minutes to create. So there you are. And then he goes on to say the descending force admits an electrical discharge which releases bubbles from the underground water, and these are springs, which rise up through the surface of the ground, and the patterns are formed. There is less pressure outside than inside, therefore there is a sort of sucking down motion from inside which bends or sucks down the crop at the base. Then he goes on to talk about the mist, because he was really excited about the mist, and he said this was all part of the formation hypothesis that he'd been working on for years. He said the mist would be as a result of cool water vapor rising from the aquifer, underground spring, beneath, and behaves in a manner similar to what happens in the lab when electrical discharges are created through water and different patterns emerge on the surface. Mist forms a little distance from the triggering point, which would support what occurred in this case. M could see the circle growing. Then he goes on to say, as for the height of the cloud, it would be no higher than the radius of the formation created, and the mist cloud would grow as the formation grew. Exactly, in terrific detail what M had told me. So then I went on to challenge James, and I said, science is absolutely valuable, and it has its essential place in research. But I said, it's not everything. We need to think outside the box. We need to be totally open-minded. And so he wrote back saying, however, the more complex patterns have additional information contained in the sphere, and who or what presses the button to make these is not within our present knowledge or understanding. Now, furthermore to this, the fact that we can have a time element is essential to this. A pilot was flying over the circle, flying over the field, and he had a doctor with him, a medical doctor, who wanted to take a picture of Stonehenge. Well, in fact, you can't fly right over Stonehenge because it's military ground, and you have to get very, very special permission. So, in fact, what was happening was that he was flying over the field where this formation actually occurred. And as you can imagine, this was so large, there was absolutely no chance whatsoever that they could have missed it. Well, this was at, this was taken at 5, he flew over at 5:30. They flew on to Thruxton, which is the airfield, and they got out. And the medical doctor just happened to drive past Stonehenge about some time later, and he couldn't understand why all the cars pulled up into the edge. And in fact, there was such a logjam that the police were called. But on top of that, the pilot flew back at, I think it was, at about 6:30, and was absolutely amazed because there was this extraordinary formation, which he simply could not have missed. They simply absolutely could not have missed. Also, the farmer had workmen working in the field until 5:30 that afternoon, and the gamekeeper said it hadn't been there in the morning, and one of the guards at Stonehenge reported that it hadn't been there. So you can say to yourself, well, how on earth was this only reported 13 years later? Well, I think one has to put yourself in the people's position, the people who were actually watching this. When you're all together in a group, you know what you're seeing, and if you're in a little group and there's no discussion about it. I mean, it's there, it's happening. But when you all split up and you drive away and you go to wherever you're going home or whatever, and you suddenly say to yourself, you know, I wonder, was I imagining that? Did it really happen? And they're certainly not going to go into a pub and say, you know, I just seen a crop circle appear. It's extraordinary how the mind plays tricks. And when you're all together in a group and you're seeing the same thing or hearing the same thing, you know that it's true. But the moment you drive away or you leave that group, you start to doubt yourself.
Right.
But it was quite remarkable. It taught us an awful lot.
Lucy, you mentioned that the police showed up to break up. Yes, after it appeared, but with 151 individual circles being made within 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, we have a time element of about 45 minutes.
Okay. You're going to need a whole bunch of people, hundreds of people showing up in a field to do that amount of work in a short period of time. But the cops weren't there to disperse a whole bunch of workers making a crop circle. So, and the evidence that James provides with the naturally occurring electrical phenomenon rules out this man-made crop circle just suddenly appearing. There's a scientific explanation instead of a man-made explanation for the Julia set.
And furthermore, the geometry in this, it was called the Julia set because it was a fractal image. And it was called the Julia set, and the geometry in there was just absolutely extraordinary. And also a lot of very strange things happened in there. I went in, I was taking some friends into the circle, and as I was walking down the tram line with them towards the circle, I suddenly had this gut feeling, don't go in. Now, very often I've ignored this and I've really paid the penalty and had terrible headaches or nausea or something. And I thought this time, well, the feeling is so strong, I mustn't go in. So very dejectedly, I turned round and I walked back. Well, the two friends who'd been in, they came out and they were absolutely pea green. They felt terrible. But the moment we were outside the radius of the circle, and I can tell you the radius was the largest I've ever been in for any crop circle, it cleared up. And this is very interesting because somebody came to stay with me that weekend, some Canadians, and he said that when he went in, he felt really radiated. And he said, what did he say? He was a biochemist, molecular biochemist, teaching in the States. felt well on entering. He went in without any expectations, never having visited a formation before. After a while, he began to experience effects very similar to feelings of intense ultraviolet radiation or gamma radiation, and this is initial nausea, both of which he said he was familiar with. The effects lasted several hours, but he experienced an unusual mental and physical well-being later. This lasted until the next day. Now he works with radiation, ultraviolet radiation and gamma radiation, so he knew exactly what he was talking about. But again, the strange thing is that it almost seems as though the amount of people that go in some way, they soak up the energy of the crop circle. And by the time I went in about a week later, because hundreds of people went in, they came from all over the world, and the farmer made an absolute killing. But when I went in with these Canadians who'd been so badly affected, we went in very worried about how we were going to feel, and we all felt absolutely fine. So it seemed as though a lot of the energy had been absorbed, if you like, by the people themselves who'd visited it.
And as you I want to come back to the some of these health effects in just a little bit, but while we're still talking about the natural formations of the crop circles, you also note that some of the crop can be pulled out by the root, and other times the crops are in a herringbone pattern. That's some really interesting energy that it would be causing the crops to overlap in opposite directions.
Well, I think the ones where the roots are pulled out, those would not be genuine, those would be man-made. But the other ones where you get overlapping and layering of crop, and you get many different layers at a time, you can look through one layer and then you see a different layer, different sort of pattern underneath the next layer. Okay, they're very, very, very complex. But there are many ways of telling which, if you're the first one in, telling between the man-made and the genuine ones, because there are man-made ones. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And some of them look very good, and it's not until you look at the geometry. And that's why when I fly, I try and take an overhead picture. This is very, very important for the mathematicians and geometers to work out the geometry.
Yeah, and do the crop circles appear in just like a couple different types of crops, like the rapeseed and wheat, or are they appearing in just a variety of different fields? Is there just like a limited number of types of crops that attract this kind of energy?
Well, I think we have to look at it from a slightly different aspect.
Okay.
Because research was done, biophysical research was done by somebody called Glenn Broughton and a colleague of his. And they found that over 90% of all crop circles appeared on chalkland. Now, again, this takes us back to the aquifers underneath. And as we live in an electric world, and this is an electric force coming down, the electrically charged water coming up from the aquifers plays an absolutely intrinsic and essential part. So when you get the phenomenon will appear in anything which will take an imprint, but it has to be really at a certain height. There was one story that I was sent, I don't know if I've included it in my book, by somebody who's now living in Australia. And so many people are fearful of being laughed at. He wrote to me, he's now well into his 60s or 70s, and he said, this is the first time I've ever spoken about it, he said. And apparently as a young man, he'd been a lad working on some farmer's land. And he was in a field of young barley, very young barley, one day. And he suddenly, a sort of wind or something came towards him. And the barley was flattened. And he fainted, or he was knocked out by whatever the electrical force was, by the frequency. And when he came to, he found that the young barley was rising up. Well, not being a very mature barley, there wasn't enough weight from the crop to hold it down. So sometimes they'll rise up very, very quickly. There are quite a lot of different elements that have to be considered. I've often said it's rather like a Christmas pudding recipe for all sorts of ingredients.
Okay, that's yeah, and we've had when Maria Wheatley was a guest, she's discussed a lot of the chalk in southern England, and we just covered some of the like the Uffington White Horse, and many of the other chalk figures in the southern England area.
So there's a band of chalk going all the way across from about Somerset, all the way to Kent, and also there's some in Oxfordshire. Around there, and also there's some in Yorkshire, bands, and this is where you'll find the circles.
Okay, so there is a pattern there. I think that's interesting, and I'm sure the listeners are intrigued by that as well. Just we keep hearing the same pattern of the prehistoric people being drawn to the areas where chalk is under the ground, and you get the aquifers. It's very interesting, and since you just mentioned Yorkshire. Your co-author James Lyons is living up there. Is he also seeing these patterns up there in Yorkshire, and he's coming down to visit you as well to do some of his research?
Oh yes, he's certainly the ones he's had in Yorkshire. Some have been very close to where he actually lives, but he comes down to visit me, and he's part of my scientific annual research day, and we get a group of scientists together and medical people, and we conduct tests. So we work very much together. In fact, we've worked together for by 20 years.
Okay. And Barbara has a question. So,
Well, I have
Barbara,
many, but I have yeah, but I have one I want to. I know that the preponderance of the crop circles that people know about happen in Great Britain, in that area of the country. But we have, vast farmlands here in this country. Are there crop circles that appear in the United States and we just don't hear about them?
Oh, well, I think
or
so.
Are
I
you,
think so.
Yeah. Are you just prime territory?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Well, it just seems that the only ones that we really hear about are the ones that happen in Great Britain and the environs over there, and yet we have fields that are very, very similar here in this country that would be perfect for crop circles, and yet I don't recall hearing much, if anything, about crop circles in this country.
Well, just recently you haven't had very many, but the crop circles appear all over the world. It's a universal phenomenon. At the moment, I think they've appeared in either 55 or 56 different countries. England is, in a way, unique because the area which is suitable for the circles is relatively small, and people can see them or find them quite easily. Mind you, I think on several occasions, when you can't see them from the road or they're very difficult to access, farmers have come upon them quite suddenly when they were harvesting and said, "Oh my goodness, there's a crop circle." Yes, I think it certainly seems to happen more in the UK, and we've got so many sacred sites all around those areas, and this is absolutely essential because I think if one thinks about it, and Maria would agree with me on this, is that we have a grid work of energy lines which are electric running through our planet, and we have certain what we call nodal points where they meet and they cross. Now those are sources of tremendous energy, and you'll find that all the pyramids in the world, in Bosnia, Mexico, China, Russia, Egypt, are all built on those nodal points. So are all our cathedrals, so are our churches. And our ancient forebears, ancient ancestors, they understood this. They understood the power and the energy coming from these crossover points. And so all the crop circles, the genuine crop circles, are also on these nodal points, crossover electrical nodal points. And, sorry, this is an electrical phenomena.
Okay, Lucy, so the crop circles are appearing at these nodal points. Okay, that's a predictable location. But are they do they appear on certain anniversaries? Certain days. Something like you do have dates in your book, but that's when you were taking the photo at the site. Is there any way to correspond this, the appearance of, this crop circle with a certain date?
Well, no, that's a very good question because intensive research has been done on this by various people. We've wondered if it has anything to do with the lunar cycle. Okay. We've wondered if it has anything to do with days of the week. We've wondered if it has anything to do with weather conditions. We've examined all different possibilities, and none of them come up as being remarkable in any way whatsoever. It's very random.
Okay. I just wondered, and you do mention in your book that all these megalithic sites that we've spoken about on numerous shows are positioned on these ley lines, and the same concept continued a few thousand years later with the medieval architects building Little St. Mary's Church on the ley line as well. So it's just interesting to see how there's almost like thousands of years of an uninterrupted pattern going on.
Yes, absolutely. You see, James was talking. Let me see what I can see in this, because he's great, and he has a great way of connecting things together. He says here, the future of the crop circle phenomenon is likely to grow significantly, since interest in the topic of an electric universe is growing dramatically. Generally speaking, gravity is no longer thought to be the key organizing feature in cosmology. Rather, electricity, seen as propagated in spiral filaments, rising to prominence as an important factor. And this is where we're talking about an electric world. And this is why so much of these nodal points that we're discussing, where places of sacred places are located or situated, and the crop circles, there's all a linking up, a connection between all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you would, with the medieval churches being on, the other nodal points, just say Stonehenge. Do you expect healing to be happen, miracle cures and things like that at sacred sites? And you document your own experiences with these energies. You have quite a few cases of people contacting you, going there to the location with someone, and you've really spent a lot of time examining these energies' effects on Parkinson's disease. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're learning with that subject?
Sorry, what was your final thing? Did I have any doubts? Did you say?
No. What are you learning about Parkinson's disease in the crop circles?
Oh, right. Yes. Well, in fact, what we do, I work with somebody called Dr. Paul Gary from, he's an advanced clinical physiologist who works from the Devon and Exeter Hospital. He's particularly interested in the neurological aspect, and he also works on scoliosis, which is the curvature of the spine. But Parkinson's comes into his work as well. And each year we do tests. And this has all been very much a developing area. It's developed as our methodology has developed and improved. Our technology has also developed and improved. In the early days, it was very difficult for batteries to retain a charge. So we had to work very, very quickly, because the essence of the day is that we start off in a room, usually in Avebury, which is part of the Avebury Stone Complex, and we test people who've got Parkinson's, people who haven't got Parkinson's, and then other scientists come and do their various work on different aspects, which is what their particular research. We then go into the circle. We repeat the tests. We then come out of the circle, go to a location away from the circle, and repeat those tests again. So that in fact, we have conducted 3 identical tests. The results are recorded and analyzed. And this, over the years, if people would like to look at my website and go to the articles, you will see what results we've had. Last year, we were measuring saccadic eye movements. Now, saccadic eye movements are this is if you're following a moving object, like a pendulum or something like that. People who haven't got Parkinson's, they've got very smooth eye movements. But, sorry, people with Parkinson's disease, sorry, I'm going to have to stop for a moment.
Okay.
Hold on a minute, I'll do this thing. Hold on a minute.
Barbara, what do you think? Pretty exciting information we're getting today.
Absolutely. And you know, I've always had a fascination with crop circles and their energy, especially when I walked into the crop circle. It almost felt as though I was surrounded in a bubble of sorts, so that the external noise didn't reach my ears. It was a feeling of peace, and I must have hit a good crop circle, I guess. But it felt to me as though I was in. It felt to me as though I was in the entranceway to a portal, so that it was in some ways an opening to another dimension through which you had to go through some sort of airlock or chamber or something like that. It felt like that's what that's what it felt like to me.
That's brilliant, Barbara. I'm back again. So many people reported similar effects. You're not the only person who's got a croaky throat, Barbara, too. It's just been going around. So then we have these results, and as I was saying, if people would like to go onto my website and read my articles, I think they'd see exactly what research we're doing. We've also done testing for a tremor. We've done something called the Geobella Test. This is interesting. The Geobella Test is if you tap your forehead with your first finger, and oh Lord, sorry, this is awfully difficult for me at the moment. I'm going to have to
go get some hot tea or something. I can pontificate. Well, I have never been accused of being at a loss for words, especially when the topic is so dear and near to my heart. I feel that we've just really scratched the surface as to the real meaning behind the crop circles. In many ways, as I said before, I think they're portals, but in other ways, I feel that a lot of times the designs are giving us information that we can utilize to help to open a portal on this side or this dimension to the other dimensions. And basically, we've been looking at them as though they were pretty pictures, but so many of them are sacred geometry. So many of them are universal symbols. So many, I know one of them was the symbol of the tree of life. So that spiritually speaking, I think in many ways, wherever it's coming from is trying to lead us on a spiritual journey, and scientifically analyzing them is fine and good and well. But there's also a spiritual aspect and dimension here that has to be gotten to in order to utilize the crop circle for the purpose that it was meant to be.
I quite agree, Barbara. Wholeheartedly, I agree. This is a very, very important aspect, which unfortunately, people who challenge this subject, they don't want to hear just about the spiritual aspects. They want science.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the spiritual aspect is often missed out and is lost. And I've been very much on that track.
I think what happens is people try to logically understand something that is really based in faith. And, good luck. It doesn't work
I quite
that
agree.
way.
But in order to make this subject credible,
yeah,
you have to have science.
Oh, you do, absolutely. But sooner or later, there's a leap of faith.
Yes. I mean, I'm very much on the spiritual side. Always have been. But the more I've investigated this subject, the more I have come across such skepticism that I've realized the basis of this when you're talking to people, doing interviews, writing books, whatever, you have to talk about science.
Absolutely.
And then suddenly they'll listen to you. And then you can get on to the spiritual aspect, which is absolutely essential.
Oh, well, spiritual journeys have always needed to have a logical, scientific hook to get people to listen. And then once you are able to plant the seed, then consciousness takes over. And for the most part, people do begin to embrace something that was inside of them all along, but they didn't know it.
It's like an awakening, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's really, really lovely. So many people, they feel so much better for being inside a circle. They come out completely changed. I've had so many wonderful stories sent to me by people. There was a lovely one. Which when I was doing a talk in Glastonbury, when I do a talk there, I always end up by doing 20 minutes or so of a sight and sound presentation. And I have a stream of crop circle pictures matched with the most heavenly music. And I can't tell you how it affects people. And this was what one person said. Everybody comes out smiling. She said, it wasn't until your presentation on the 27th of July, my 51st birthday, that I realized my past, my present, and my future. In other words, my purpose came into being.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. This is so difficult for me. She said the first 3 crop circles that you showed in your sight and sound presentation hit me so powerfully that I wasn't able to breathe.
Oh, wow.
I had an intense release of emotion. It's lovely, lovely. So many lovely reports I get from people. And there was a most glorious one, which, if my voice were lost out. Oh, dear. I'm so sorry about this. You know what it's like, Barbara. This is somebody who just went to Stonehenge. And oh, bother. That's my telephone. I can't do anything about that.
Yeah, we have now there's sinus drainage. Now a possible guest calling me. That's wonderful.
Hello, Mark. This is Mike.
There's. Okay, so.
I'm so sorry.
Well, this doesn't happen when we're doing it late at night, but certainly during the day, everybody is up and functional, and it does happen. But
yeah.
No, I.
The wonders of live radio.
Yeah, don't worry about the coughing. Your information is so good that nobody will notice it, so don't worry.
Oh, well, you're so kind. May I read you something? You know, I take these tours, and I had crop circle tours, and in one of them, there's an optional extra of going into Stonehenge, a private entry visit, and in the other one, after the tour, there's an optional extra of flying over the circles. But there was one woman who particularly wanted to go into Stonehenge. She was absolutely dying to go into Stonehenge. And she was quite a sort of everyday sort of person, but she just had to go in. And this is what she wrote. I'm not going to try and transpose it because I couldn't write anything so beautifully. She said, as I walked up the ramp and Stonehenge came into view, I became aware of a very low frequency hum. I felt myself slip thousands of years into the past, and the other people in my group seemed to disappear. My breathing became erratic, and I struggled to catch my breath. Then I was flying back into the present, but with the understanding that I was also still in the past, both existences occurring simultaneously. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I approached the monument, but I tried to push them back and to keep my composure. The next thing I remember is standing at the place where you can see the sun rise over the heelstone at summer solstice and trying to listen to what Lucy was saying. That particular spot seemed to accelerate my emotions, at that point, spiraled out of control. I started uncontrollably sobbing. I felt pure joy at coming home, but I also felt the sadness at what had been lost. It seemed as though I felt several lifetimes worth of emotions, all in a manner of moments. I was unable to sleep that night. Well, I remember putting my arm around her, trying to comfort her, and she moved away. She had to be on her own. And, I find this so often with people. Somebody came from Norway just to go into Stonehenge with me, and she said, I've come home. You're in this is why it's actually so difficult to get tickets. I have to get mine in September for this tour. But when you're inside the actual stone circle and you're standing next to these megaliths and you're absorbing their energy, it's something quite unique. So if anybody wants to come to Stonehenge with me, I've got a few tickets left. That's on the 23rd.
There you go. We have a lot of listeners in Rotherham and Barnsley. Come on down to Hampshire, and Lucy will get you out to Stonehenge.
Well, I know it's a unique experience. It really is. It's so special.
But,
so special.
and Lucy, we have the Julia set was in the field opposite Stonehenge, but there is a pattern that you document of the crop circles appearing at other near other megalithic sites. You get Silbury Hill and which is part of the Avebury Stone Circle complex. And you mentioned the Barbury Castle.
That's a very ancient Iron Age hill fort.
Yeah. Okay. So there. Yeah. Besides the all these ley lines. There's more of these. The crop circles are appearing near other megalithic sites. So this isn't just like a one-time thing near Stonehenge. It's fairly common.
They're all on the if you've got a sacred site and it's on chalkland, you're very likely to get a crop circle.
Mhm. So there's your I just find that really interesting, and these we have two samples of stone circles and the Iron Age hill fort. Can you tell us a little bit about the hill fort? Is it like a walled hilltop or something like that?
It's a grass mound, but the one at Barbury Castle is enormous. I remember walking around it, and it took me almost a whole morning to walk around it. It's absolutely enormous. It's a grass mound, which has been there for many, many years. Often it has sort of terraces on it. And they vary in size. There's many down in Dorset too. Dorset is on chalkland, and you get them round there. You get them round the Iron Age hill forts in Dorset.
Okay.
Yes, Barbara. Sorry, you were going to ask something.
Yeah, that's just interesting. I enjoy learning about these patterns, and you're just doing an excellent job of delineating them. And in your book, you also have a lot of information about the going to some of these crop circles with your friends that just say have Parkinson's disease.
Oh yes, that was an extraordinary event.
Yeah, and sitting in the circle, center of the circle, did greatly reduce the tremors for about a day, and made another statement as like page 115 that can some of this crop circles be more effective in treating certain medical conditions like Parkinson's? The one 2 fields over is better for people suffering from allergies. Is there like different energies being emitted from these crop circles that are more conducive to healing certain medical conditions?
Well, I don't know, because we're just investigating Parkinson's at the moment scientifically.
Okay.
But certainly ones which are genuine will certainly show scientific changes in the brain. It was very interesting one time I wrote about it in my book. One time we were going to do, because I never know until the last moment which is the circle we're going to use. We also have to have the farmer's permission, etc. But one appeared one morning which was very new, and so we went in. We were given the permission to go in, and there were no results at all, no changes at all in the brain activity. Turned out it had actually been man-made. Well, this was a very valuable experiment. We didn't know that it was man-made, but the scientific results showed that it had, and I later found out that it had been man-made. So, unwittingly, we'd done a very, very good test showing the difference between the man-made and the genuine and the according results. Well, so many lovely things have happened. And certainly some of the healing things have been quite remarkable, on top of really feeling quite ill at times. There were some really lovely ones. I remember one time going into a field of oilseed rape or canola with a great friend of mine, and I didn't realize she actually had a broken collarbone, because when we were in there, for some reason or other, I was asking people to gather stones, and I can't remember particularly why I was doing that. I think it was in 2001. And so she just happened to mention she had a broken collarbone, and it wasn't all that easy for her. Well, her normal physiotherapist was away, and so she had a fill-in physiotherapist who when Colette went to see her, this physiotherapist said, but I'm supposed to be treating a broken collarbone. And she said, you haven't got a broken collarbone. She said, you haven't even got the little lump which would show after somebody has broken our collarbone. So Colette said, well, why don't you look at the original X-ray? And so she did, and she said, my goodness, yes. There it shows quite clearly the break. And yet there isn't any evidence of you ever having had a break. And this was after being in the crop circle.
Interesting. Okay, and Barbara, do you
have another question? Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
I know that there have been studies done on ancient aquifers, and that the ancient aquifers in Great Britain especially have healing aspects to them. So is there a correlation between crop circle ancient aquifers being more healing than crop circles that are not on ancient aquifers?
Well, the ones which are not on ancient aquifers are man-made. So
and
you're not
and the healing.
to be, and
well,
all the genuine ones are on aquifers.
Okay, that's where I was going, because
so
there's
see, this is it. Yes, it all depends whether it's genuine or not. I mean, if they're not on a nodal point, they're not going to be genuine, because this is all part of the forming process. The electrical charge coming up from the given this particular frequency, coming up from the water. Yes, you're absolutely right. And this is why the nodal points on chalkland are absolutely an essential part of this whole formation process.
Well, that makes great sense, because then you have a harmonic that is working on the body's energetic, and if you are synchronizing yourself if you're synchronizing yourself to the earth energy, then then you have to become whole. You don't have a choice.
Exactly. Exactly. And not everybody feels well, though, even in a genuine crop circle. And I think that depends on the state of your health. And also, we all have totally different metabolisms, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So this can have an effect on certain people. But I always say, always, if you don't feel well, come out immediately.
Yes, but healing often is getting rid of toxicity, and the toxicity can make you feel unwell.
Oh, you're so right. You're so right, Barbara. This is all to do with homeopathy. And this certainly has to play a part. There's no doubt about it. And I think this has been an aspect which, homeopathy is not considered solid science by a lot of people, but we all know that it works.
Yes.
And therefore it's dismissed. So much of this is dismissed, you see, and this is why we have to have the basis of science, because so much of what we're finding in the circles is just purely discarded. But for those of us who are in tune and who go along, are interested in the spiritual aspect, it all makes tremendous sense. Our ancient forebears, they all knew about all the things we're talking about that are happening in the circles. And there's so much evidence, but also there are so many different aspects to the circles. There was one extraordinary one that appeared. It was called the Jaw Dropper, and it appeared in 2001. And one of the ways you can tell if a crop circle is genuine is that if it's appeared on a night when it's been raining and there's absolutely no marks on the fallen crop, then you can be pretty certain it's genuine. Because if you're walking down a tram line, which is the marks in the field, the lines in the field which the farmers use for driving their tractors down and their machinery for sowing and reaping and all sorts of things, if you then walk into the standing crop and you've got muddy feet, you're absolutely bound to leave muddy marks. There's absolutely no avoidance.
Right.
And this one had absolutely no mud on it whatsoever. And I got a letter, an email from people who I know who actually do make circles. And I won't give them their names, but they wrote and they said, here's something to ponder. If this formation was man-made, allowing for the time to get into and out of the field under cover of darkness, the construction time left would be about 4 hours. Given that there are over 400 circles, in fact there were 409, some of which span 70 foot in diameter, that would mean that one of those circles would need to be created every 30 seconds. And that's not even allowing any time for the surveying, purely flattening. This formation pushes the envelope, and that's a massive understatement. My brain hurts. So I thought that was wonderful. This was so honest. And I wrote that up because I felt I really had to give them credit for being so really amazingly honest. So that was great. But we have so many other stories of strange things happening. I'm going to tell you one about a strange happening at Avebury. And this was in 2013. a young man who was with a couple of other friends, they went to camp, not in a campground, but just in a field, any old field. They went to sleep close together. But he woke up, this is the young man who told the story, he woke up in the middle of the night on the other side of the fence, nearby, and at least 20 foot away, totally baffled about how he'd got there and why. He knew he hadn't climbed the fence because it was made of barbed wire, and he had no scratches on his skin and no torn clothes. The other two people were totally unaware of him having got up and having to manage to get to the other side of the fence. He felt strange and disorientated. That's a strange story.
Mm-hmm. And you do mention being disoriented. You do mention that there are a few cases of it's a little bit like missing time as well.
Oh, yes. My goodness me. There was one wonderful, wonderful crop circle last summer at Hackpen, and I went into it. I couldn't, I just felt I had to keep on going in. I took both my tours in there. And the first time I went in with my goddaughter, who was over from New Zealand. And when we came out, we just sat there and meditated and absorbed the energy from the ground, the earth energy, the energy of the crop circle. It was a beautiful day, and you feel as though you're in a bubble. You're completely divorced from the rest of the outside world. Everything could be going on around you, and you're completely not a part of it. Anyhow, when we came out, I was speaking to somebody outside, and he said, Lucy, do you know how long you've been in there? And I said, oh, well, not really so long, but I said it was wonderful. He said, you've been in there an hour and a half. And you lose all sense of time.
That's interesting. There's, crop circles, UFO encounters. There's a little overlap there. With the missing time. Is there more crop circle UFO connections?
Well, I find that very difficult to answer because I've never seen a UFO. So
I haven't either. I just wondered.
I just feel that there have to be other existences beyond ours, apart from ours. So there could be other intelligences involved in this phenomenon. Why not? But I just don't have any evidence of it. But I'm perfectly open-minded about this. In fact, I think that it's completely possible.
Okay. Some of the these energies we've discussed, the healing properties, connections to the stone circles or the Iron Age hill fort. You also give us an example of a crop circle that really kind of takes us into almost like the computer age, and Avebury might actually be seen as a early computer. Stonehenge would be one too. But you mentioned do a significant section on the Wilton windmill, and there are a lot of there's a circle with these lines like don't really unfinished lines of different lengths, and you drew a lot. You draw a lot of significance from that, connecting it to music. Can you explain what these little bit more symbolic crop circles mean, or how we should be interpreting them?
Well, I think how we're interpreting in the majority of them is very much a personal interpretation, but some have very obvious interpretations, like one which was formed like a dragonfly, that was called the dragonfly. Then you get the one we discussed initially, the Julia set, which was a fractal image. The one at Wilton Windmill was very similar to Lawrence Euler's theorem, but it was a highly, highly complex theorem, and it's said that Lawrence Euler himself was probably the only one who really fully understood it. And then we got the one at also near Barbary Castle, which was the Pythagoras, and it was the one that was pi to the power of 9. And when you talk about the music, I think one has to go back to Pythagoras, who told us that number and music were related. Well, in the past, sadly, both these people are now no longer with us. But so therefore what we're dealing with geometry, which is number. And then you transpose it into frequencies, and you can actually play it on the piano. And James Lyons, he tries to play the Euler formation on the piano. He said it wasn't very harmonious. But these two other friends of mine, who, as I say, sadly are no longer with us, they did recordings quite individually of the music, which they translated from the number. One was the DNA formation in 1996, and I forget the other one that was used, and you got this sort of rhythmic beat. They made recordings of them. So this is again a different area of science which is being used to determine certain aspects of this phenomenon.
And this math and the use of pi, it just seems like there's some kind of intelligence behind these designs. There are a few just basic patterns of just concentric circles, but like that Wilton windmill, it does seem to have something that has a real deeper symbology to it than many of the other ones. I would, and when you bring James in to do his scientific writing, he does a great job of explaining the science behind the crop circles, and the Wilton windmill is, I thought, one of the more outstanding examples that he delved into.
Yes, indeed. He does a fantastic job. And I think this is one of the great aspects of the whole book. He has put his wisdom, his scientific wisdom, into talking about this and relating the science to the various aspects of this phenomenon. It's absolutely fantastic, and it hasn't been done. It hasn't been done before in this particular way. So this is why I think this book is of such value to everybody, really. People, not just scientists, but also to actual scientists. But getting back to the area of, I believe very much that there's a consciousness or intelligence about this phenomenon. And if one thinks of a cosmic consciousness, if you like, and one has to ask the question, is there indeed a consciousness inherent in the crop circles that links itself to the human mind, or vice versa? And to me, the answer is a resounding yes. And we're all part of this universal consciousness, which is multidimensional and it's multi-interactive, and it's all part of this cosmic consciousness. And again, you have to think about consciousness. What exactly is consciousness? And I read something which I think is brilliant. Consciousness may not be generated by the brain, but rather transceived by the brain, i.e. the consciousness may be a fundamental, non-local property of all dimensions of the universe, and that rather than be an epiphenomenon of brain activity, it may instead be that the brain acts as an interface that allows consciousness to manifest locally on the material plane.
That makes sense.
It does, doesn't it? For a long time, I've often strived to find an explanation for consciousness. And if you can think about it in those terms, it's really helpful.
But if you look at the fact that we are spirits on a human journey, that our physicality is just the vehicle our spirit is riding through in, it's like a good car. Good cars have computers in them that help to communicate between the vehicle and the driver. And that's exactly what our physical bodies are, is that computer that helps to communicate the physicality with the spirit that we carry within. It makes perfect sense.
It does, doesn't it? It does. Yeah. And this is the lovely part of it, because so many people, their lives have been changed. Going back to maybe what this consciousness is, their lives have been changed by this phenomenon in a truly wonderful way. They've opened, the doors have been opened to other dimensions, other levels of consciousness. They see things in a completely different way. Yes, their whole life has been transformed in a truly wonderful way. And as I say, I've got over 800 reports. I'm aiming for 1,000 of people who have sent me reports of how they have felt not only inside the crop circle, but in the vicinity of crop circles, or even watching slides of crop circles when people are giving talks. Because again, the vibrations are coming off the pictures and affecting them by just even being there and watching them, watching the slides. They're very, very powerful.
Have you ever considered that the crop circle is like a magnet for those whose consciousnesses are ready to embrace another level of understanding?
Well, it could very well be, and some people, they can't cope with the subject at all, and I think it's very interesting that you come to it when you're ready to come to it. Maybe that's some sort of consciousness which is directing you to it because you're ready for it, but it's a challenging subject, and I've come across several people, and they've always been men who've been really fascinated by the subject, but then something happens to them. Something occurs, and it's reached their boggle threshold, and they can't cope anymore. And so they leave the subject, and in order to pacify themselves or live with their sudden volte-face, if you like, they then start to rubbish it, because that is their safety valve. It's the most extraordinary thing. I've seen it on several occasions with people I've worked with quite closely, and suddenly they've changed.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you said, there is a threshold, and sometimes people just can't. When I saw the UFO, I was in college, and I was in the girls' dorm when we saw it, and it was interesting because when it flew right over the dorm, some people were terrified and went and hid in closets. Other people were fascinated by it, like I was, and then there were other people that didn't see it. I mean, there was a girl standing right next to me, and it flew so low over the dorm you couldn't miss it because it blanked out the sky, and yet she did not see it, and I did, and I was just awestruck by it. And she didn't see it at all, and there were people that were screaming, and the end is near type stuff. So I think it's if you have the consciousness to embrace it, it floods you with wonderful information. And if you think don't, so,
but you have to be,
you reject it.
You have to be ready to accept it. But I think this also, if we go back to the Julia set, I think this is why a lot of people, despite having seen it right in front of their eyes, would probably when the moment they left, they wouldn't accept it. Their conscious mind would say, no, we didn't really see that at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it works on them. It will work on them on a subconscious level eventually.
Eventually, it will. I know. So it takes a long time with some people.
Yes.
But I think an awful lot of people, they're frightened. They're very, very frightened of this subject because it's taking them into areas which they don't understand, and in a way, they don't want to understand them because it's too frightening. They're not ready for it. They can't. They wouldn't be ready for it. But I've learned so much. I think I've learned more in the last 25, 30 years than I've learned for the rest of my life, because it's such an all-embracing subject. You have the science, you have the music, you have the spiritual journey, you have the geology, you have all the ologies embraced in this one phenomenon.
And you never have all the answers.
No, I mean that's what's so brilliant.
Yeah,
that's what I love. I love about it, and that's what's so good, isn't it?
Every time you think you have it, I've got a handle, then you find it's like an onion. You find there's another level that you've peeled down to, and you're back to square one.
Yes. It's very good for us.
Yes,
it's really good. It's levels. It's a real leveler. Yes, you never get conceited, I can tell you.
No.
And Lucy, when we were talking the other day, and you were talking about, there's a ley line around Winchester and a highway was going to be built to direct the lorries around the towns that have bottling up traffic downtown. So while they were building the road, the lane line was damaged, but it is healing, repairing itself, rebounding, whatever term you want to use. Would something like that, self-healing, happen if this proposed tunnel were to be built around Stonehenge, or is that just damaging the ley line too much?
Well, I think it's going to damage not just one, but many, many ley lines. I think it's going to, as we were discussing the other day, I think it's going to do such irreparable damage that I can't see that whole area recovering well for centuries, if at all, because it's not just one ley line it's going to affect. It's going to affect many. And it's on a I mean, the amount of history still to be excavated in that area is tremendous. I mean, more and more is coming to light all the time about how vast the settlement was.
Right.
And it's absolutely huge. I don't think we know the full extent of it yet.
Okay. It's just nice to know that you've given us information that there is the self-healing, but that can happen. At least we know that it's the tunnel idea by Stonehenge. That just really sounds like a wound that is really going to. It may heal at some point, like you said. Like that might be generations, but it's going to leave like a really bad scar type thing. It's just interesting to get your perspective, since you're
I think
a neighbor.
It's going to disrupt so much of the area around it too. I mean, this is not just immediately. It's going to affect the whole area for miles and miles and miles.
Okay, and since we're talking about the effects of the ley lines and earth energy, you do discuss in the energies of crop circles that you have done some studies with burying bottles of water inside the stone circles, outside. Can you tell us a little bit about the conclusions of your tests?
Well, the conclusions, I've done extensive. I can no longer do them because there's one lab that we were using latterly, which tested for trace minerals. They wanted me to bury half-pint bottles of water. Well, can you imagine me digging holes that size in a farmer's field? It doesn't bear thinking about. And so I've had to curtail that. But I've done sufficient research on that area that I think whatever I've found is conclusive. that there is a difference between the control bottles buried outside and the bottles buried inside. Several scientists from all over the world have tested them using different techniques. And what in fact the procedure is that I fill them with these little bottles. I fill them with Volvic water, because Dr. Cyril Smith, he said you've got to use water which is as constant as possible, and that didn't go above 4 hertz. So I've always used Volvic water ever since. The control samples, I bury outside the circle to start with. Then I go into the circle, bury the other bottles at strategic places, and I hope to remember where they are. The trouble is, as you can imagine, if you go in fairly new, and a whole lot of people go in subsequently, they've destroyed all the areas that you think you're going to remember where you put the bottles. So it boils down to a dicing exercise. But I leave the bottles inside for really what's convenient for me, maybe a week, 10 days. I then go into the field again. I hopefully collect the bottles. In fact, I've collected over 90%. By using dicing, and then I come out and I collect the control samples. And in that way, the control samples never take on the energy of inside the circle. And they're then sent blind to be tested, and I get the results. And we've had some extraordinary results in the past, and showing very, very different results between the two. We also did another test one time, and sadly I was only able to do it once because I think the lab closed down, of a protein test. I took samples of wheat heads, and from inside, and samples from outside. And we sent them off to a lab to be tested, and the results were absolutely extraordinary. They came back that the ones inside had 40% higher protein levels than the ones outside.
Lucy,
and that was amazing.
Have you done any work with animals? Because I recall a long time ago they were saying that animals would not eat the wheat that had become a crop circle, that they veered away from it, that they wouldn't eat the wheat that was in the circle itself.
Oh dear, that's a very sad subject, because again I wrote that up in my book. And I think I put this down to the sprays that the farmer uses. And I collected some barley one time from being inside a circle, and I put it underneath the dining room table, and I had a most beautiful, very large grey cat. And he came into the dining room with me one day, and he went straight for this bunch of barley. And I looked at him, and I wondered what he was doing, and then I saw that he was sucking it. And so anyhow, I got him out. But every time I went into the dining room, he went in like a flash and started sucking it again. And eventually, last time that it happened, I write it up in my book, I shut the door and I wouldn't let him in. And when I came out, I bent down to stroke him, and he reared up on his hind legs, and I only just stood up in time because he was very big. He was going to rake my face with his claws.
Oh my!
Now I tried everything. It has completely changed after the initial going into with that barley. I tried with the vet. I tried every single possible thing I could with homeopathy. Nothing would cure him. He became an extremely vicious cat, and it was almost as though there'd been some chemical change in his brain.
Yeah.
It was a most unfortunate, and I've heard other people say that their cat has also been attracted to wheat heads or barley that they've brought back. But so yes, that is that was a very unhappy result. But also
well,
we've had
the only, I mean, with people, it seems to heal and is not to eat it, but to be in its presence. But you know, the cows, you know, the farmers that have plowed it under, not even under, but that have, you know, harvested it for their cows to use as feed, the cows would not eat it. They wouldn't touch it.
Oh, right. Well, I'm not at all surprised. I'm not at all surprised.
Lucy, one of the highlights of your book is your wonderful aerial photography. You get, some of these, it's kind of like overhead shots, the oblique shots that show more of, the countryside for miles around, like the Westwoods, crop circle in Wiltshire, the Wilton Windmill one. You see all the farmland nearby. You have beautiful photos.
Thank you.
When is the best time for you to, or really anyone to be in a helicopter to do aerial photography?
Really in the morning or the evening, because those are the best times. You get the most lovely lights. In the morning you get a very bright sort of sharp light, and in the evening you get a lovely sort of gentle soft light. In the middle of the day, the sun is overhead. You're not really going to get shadows or contrast, not in the same way as in the morning or the evening. But a lot of those pictures, I have to say, are thanks to the skill of the pilots, because they've got to be able to put you in a position, and you have to say, well, hi there. You're giving them directions all the time, and they've got to be able to follow those directions in order to allow you to take those pictures. So it's not just me. I can tell you that. It's also a lot of the thanks go to the pilots.
Okay, and Lucy, we have about 10 minutes left in this show, and I want to give you enough time at the end to talk about upcoming appearances and where to get your book and your website. But as we start to wind down, what is one or two things that we still need to know about crop circles? Now, you mentioned some of the blood tests you wanted to do. Is there anything else we need to know, how they affect people, or the use of megalithic yards?
Well, now John Michel was a genius about megalithic yards. An awful lot of the places around Silbury Hill are all separated in megalithic yards, and they're absolutely perfectly all using a megalithic yards. Silbury Hill to West Kennet Long Barrow to Swallow Head Springs. They're all placed using megalithic yards. But there are other wonderful, wonderful places around there, like the West Kennet Long Barrow, which is one of the oldest in the country. And it wasn't really, in the old days, I mean, that predates Silbury Hill. And it would have been, it's a mound, but it would have stood out. It would have been so dominant in the landscape because it's chalk, and it would have been gleaming white. And even Silbury Hill now, which is covered in grass, just as West Kennet Long Barrow is covered in grass, they would have stood out too because they would have been gleaming white, gleaming chalk. These were all statements in the landscape. But not only were they statements, they were built in such a way that at certain times of the year, the solstices or other special times of year, they would point in what you call sight lines. The rising of the sun would be exactly behind, say, Waden Hill or something, exactly behind something else. They weren't just placed randomly in the landscape. They were placed there very, very specifically with spiritual intent. So this is, again, all part of the crop circle phenomenon. But I suppose one of my biggest regrets is if we go back onto the scientific side and we talk a little bit more about Parkinson's, which one of my favorite cousins, he died of Parkinson's. So this is a subject which is very, very close to my heart. And if we could ever find anything which would help the mainstream science in this area, I mean, I feel that would be testimony of the value and importance of the circles themselves. But it's frustrating research because we can only do one day's research, whatever it is. What I'd like to be able to do is to go back the next day, or go back a week later, or go back a month later and redo the tests. But unfortunately, not only is that impossible for many different reasons, for the scientists who are so generous in giving me their time and knowledge and understanding, they're busy people. On top of that, the energy in the circle will have changed, and it might even have been harvested out. So this is an area which is so frustrating. I can get so far, but I can't get any further. Also, there is no way we have of detecting exactly what the force is inside the circle. And this is something I long to know, but at the moment, our technology is not such that we can actually identify what that particular energy is. So, I mean, I'm not going to stop. I'm going on with it. But there are many areas which are frustrating.
Well, I hope you get to continue with the testing. And you just mentioned the solstice. That's just under a month away. Do you have more helicopter tours and other just land tours coming up around the solstice?
Sometimes they appear. Sometimes they don't. Again, this is unpredictable.
Okay. What do you have? Lectures coming up? What?
Well, yes, I do. I do in England, yes. And those I'll be putting up on my website, and my pictures go up on my website, and my articles go up on my website, and my book is holding a very prominent place on my website. And if anybody, also my tours, if people would like to come on tours with me, because it's just a magical experience, please get in touch. And as I was saying, Stonehenge is a unique, if you can visit Stonehenge. It is very interesting. Sometimes the pineal gland, this is a very important gland, which is in the forefront of our well, it's actually, it's linked to the hypothalamus. But another, one of the interesting things is, it may be totally irrelevant, but it's just a useless piece of knowledge that I rather enjoy, that just as the pineal gland is physically the center of our brain, so Stonehenge is physically the center of our planet.
Interesting.
Probably quite useless information, but it's
interesting way to look at things. Have there been any new crop circles that have formed this early on in the late spring, early summer season, or do they usually appear in July when the wheat is taller?
Oh, they can appear in April. We've had them in April in oilseed rape or the canola. And yes, in fact, they're a little bit late this year. We had one the other day at Norwich Woods near Warminster. And yeah, that was a little bit late. That was in barley, because after the oilseed rape, the next crop that is up to the sufficient height is barley. Then you get wheat and you get oats. And then we've have had it in sweet corn or maize. I'm not certain what you call it in the States.
I'm not sure either.
So it's hollow stemmed. What's interesting about the oilseed rape is that it's a hollow stem crop, and it's very easy to detect if you're one of the first people in, whether that's man-made or not, because it's being hollow stemmed. It snaps if broken at an angle of more than 40 degrees, and also bruises very easily and cracks very easily. So it's a very fragile plant. You can easily see if what we're looking for is to see if any weight has been applied. You know, people going in with their boards and stomping boards and things.
And people can order your book at innertraditions.com, and your website is lucypringle.co.uk.
That's it, and I'm very happy to sign it for them if they would like.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're down to like a minute. We're just very appreciative to have you as a special guest on a Friday afternoon and share, last couple hours with us. Is there anything else you want to say?
Well,
or
just many apologies for my problems with my coughing and croakiness.
I think it was so noble of you to have allergies along with me, so I didn't feel badly. I do thank you.
Oh, Barbara, you're so lovely. Well, that's very cheering, and I hope you get better very quickly.
You too.
Well,
Mark, it's time to say goodbye.